and welcome back to the Genesis Designs and Modelcraft bench, and back here with the Tornado GR1 Foxy killer build. And in this video we're going to look at the Eduard decals. Now, the decal sheet in this kit, it's quite comprehensive. There are several options of different aircraft to do. There are not many stencils, but that's fine because these were sort of fieldish overpainted, and I guess most of the stencils got overpainted as part of that. But all of the main markings are here, plus obviously these special nose arts, which is really the raison d'etre of this kit really. So Eduard decals then. I don't know exactly when the change occurred, but at some point in the relatively recent past they changed their decals to these new ones with the very, very thin, quite large carrier films, and it turns out that that carrier film is in fact peelable. Now, nothing I've seen suggests that this is a deliberate attempt on Eduard's part. I'll get the light on these and you can see how the carrier film is incredibly thin and quite large in most cases. Now let's focus in on these black squares. Get the light on it. In fact, I'll tell you what, I'll just cut that one off, make it a bit easier. So, has trouble getting light to reflect on black squares, great. Okay, so this is very, very, very thin carrier film. It's tapered down at the edges and it gives every indication that it's a really excellent decal, and in many respects it is. Now, this thing with peelable, I'm going to try and demonstrate now. It's a piece of Tamiya tape, just ordinary. I've not detacked it. I'm going to stick that down over this black square onto the decal sheet. And I know this isn't something you'd normally do, but it's just to illustrate a point. There we go. We look at this now. Can you see on that tape? That is the clear decal carrier film, and it's peeled straight off. You can see the remnant of it left there. I keep it still long enough for it to focus. The remnant of that carrier film is still on that lower corner there. And in fact, now that it's piggled up, you can quite easily just pull it off with tweezers. So that's what I'm talking about when I'm on about peelable. Now, as I say, I've seen and heard nothing to suggest that this is a deliberate selling point of these decals. This decal is, by the way, now completely unusable. If you were to wet that, that black would just disperse in the water, because the carrier film, as the name suggests, is there to get that printed marking from the decal sheet to the model. Anyway, so now what I'm going to do, I'm going to put some of these, one or two of these nose decals on, just to show that in use they're essentially exactly the same as any other decal. There are a couple of problems inherent with these. The carrier film, being so thin, has a propensity to be a pain in the arse. When you're trying to apply the decal, it wants to curl up and fold over on itself and fold under itself, and generally misbehave if you're not very careful with the way that you handle the decal. But as I say, we'll stick one on. I tend to use the Tamiya Mark Fit solutions with these. They don't typically need anything really strong. They tend to conform and work with the surface quite well. But I like to use a little bit of something just to help. And a quick point, as while this is soaking, I'll just quickly sort of touch on the subject of glossing before decals. There's been quite a lot of debate recently in the last year or so, I suppose, that I've seen about the necessity or otherwise of a gloss coat before putting decals on. As you can see, I have done that, and I explained in the last video why. I've sealed this finish because of the hairspray that I used. I wanted to seal it so that the water I'm using now on the decals, and subsequently the various solutions that are going to get used on it for weathering, wouldn't soak through this quite soft acrylic paint layer and cause issues with the paint wanting to lift. And as you can also quite clearly see, this isn't a super heavy gloss finish. It's got a good solid sheen to it, yes, but it's not a full gloss finish. And the point I want to make really is it's absolutely true and fair to say that you don't need to gloss coat before decaling. What you need though is a smooth surface. It doesn't necessarily have to be glossy, but what it does need to be is smooth. And the thing with the glossing and using a gloss coat is by default it tends to be relatively smooth, and it allows the decal to stick nicely because of that. What I mostly do, and in fact I'll do it now just to prove that I'm not talking twaddle. I've got my decent shiny surface there, and what I will do is my best friend Trizact will come out to play, and I will just give it a little rub where that decal's going to go. I tend to do the whole model, to be honest, but any sort of minor surface flaws that are there, that gets rid of them, makes it absolutely smooth. So my decal's ready to go. It's moving quite happily. They don't take very long to soak. I'm going to put a bit of mark fit onto the model, and it will puddle up and not necessarily stay exactly where you put it, but one benefit of using the Trizact is it will stay a little bit more. And this is going to be awkward because I've got to do 8 things at once with my hands, and try and keep you in shot as well. So I tend to, especially with larger decals, using this system with this very curly carrier film, I'll put the whole thing into place and slide the backing paper out from under it rather than trying to take the decal to the model. And I'm just using the closed end of my tweezers lightly just to tease everything into position, like so. Bear with me a minute, I need to see what I'm doing. Just line that up. And to their credit, Eduard have produced a decal that actually fits this panel line detail really rather well around the gun panel. So there it is in position, not yet pressed down. To press it down I use cotton buds. Moisten them up a bit, dip them in the water or put them in your mouth, but choice is yours. But if you don't moisten them, they'll tend to stick and pull the decals around a bit too much. And I'll just roll the cotton bud, yes, we're in shot, good, across the surface of the decal, gradually working from the centre out or working from one end. I'll just push the liquid out from underneath it and pressing it down quite firmly. Obviously use some sensible caution here so as not to damage your models, but it requires a reasonable amount of pressure. Initially just roll it across to get the most of the fluid out, and then just rolling but also pressing to get that decal snugged down. And I'll come in a little close, or a lot closer to be fair. Hopefully you could, yeah, see that's already taking on that panel line detail. Note also how textured that surface is, almost has a bubbly look to it. Put one more on. Backing paper to the bin. Let's put the pretty lady on, shall we? I always like to, you can see the decal number 24 is there. I always like to cut those free where possible. If I'm doing a lot of stencils at once, I'll quite often leave them on so that I know what's what. But I like to cut them free so that I don't get one half under my decal once it's on the model, because they'll just float around once the decal is wet. Sniff, sniff. What about anybody else? But my hay fever's been giving me some jip just lately. The warm weather and now the rain, it seems to have set it off rather well. So there. That has actually matted the surface very slightly, but what it is smooth. You see how initially at least that mark fit will just sit there now because of it. And that's free and ready to go. There we go, get it into position. And then this one's a little more tricky. There's a lot more carrier film on this, and the carrier film will wrinkle ever so easily when you're moving it around and when you're teasing out the moisture. So those initial rolls do need to be very gentle. Don't be too tempted just to stroke across the surface of the decal, because they are quite happy to completely wad themselves up into a ball and or tear. So there we go. That's the teeth and the scantily clad lady in position. Now, just to aid a little bit the decal with its forming to the surface, I'll usually use a bit of Mark Fit Strong. It's not super necessary in these cases, but I'll just show you how I use it anyway. So I've painted that straight onto the decal, and a good clue that it's going to work is that it is just sitting there on top of it. It's not beading up. If you put a decal solvent onto a decal and it just beads up and sits there in baubles, it's a good sign that it isn't actually going to do very much. So I leave that for a few seconds, not for very long, there's no need. And then again, contrary to every bit of advice I've ever seen with regard to decaling, I again roll across the surface, and that has now pressed in to all of those panel lines quite nicely, thank you. Same again here, and this might wrinkle up a little bit because of the amount of clear film we've got. Let's see if it does it. Not really, it's behaving itself. Again, a few seconds to let that just soften the decal up a bit, and then firmly, but with care, rolling that out. And there you go, that's those fitted. Now, you can see, I hope, that those are already conforming very well, and because of the way the carrier film is tapered off towards its edges, it's becoming quite unobtrusive even before the decals are dry. But what you can see is that weird sort of bubbly texture that they have. Now, in order to make things quicker for myself and for you, I've already done this side. Here are some I did earlier. So here's the wing roundels are on, and the nose arts on the right hand side are on. And this is what they look like when they're completely dry. And you can see, I hope, that there isn't any real significant difference. You still see that texture. You can see how well that carrier film's actually blended in. And if you were to then recoat this model with some more gloss and then continue with your efforts towards the completion of the model, they will blend in quite well. But that bubbly texture isn't going to go anywhere. That's there to stay. So I'm now going to show you how I deal with this, and there's a few ways of going about removing this clear film. One way that a lot of people have said, and I've mentioned it after the special Hobby 109 I did, which also features these decals, is tape. And the problem with using tape is you do actually run the risk of pulling the whole thing off. And in this case, he's pulling it up. So what he's done, You see how that's now super silvered? It's pulled that carrier film up, but it hasn't pulled all of it off. And look how that will just peel straight off. Gone. The whole thing. So you can use Tamiya tape, or well, any other tape, frankly. Other tapes are available. Yeah, you can use Tamiya tape, and in this case that has very successfully removed all but a tiny little corner. I tried it on these warning triangles before and it didn't touch it. Sometimes it pulls it off, sometimes it doesn't. But as I say, there's a distinct risk, if you want to put it in those terms, that you will actually just pull the whole thing off, not just the carrier film. My preferred method is actually to use the side of the edge of my tweezers. So it's a sharp edge, but it's not a sharp edge like a scalpel is. And just tease the edge of the decal till it starts to lift. And once it starts to lift, take hold of it and peel it off. Patience is required. If you're too rough, you will take your paint off, and yes, you will damage your decal. This is the ASMR segment of the show, guys. Turn up listening for the little scratchy and teary sounds. And just very patiently and gently removing that surface film. If you're struggling to get it to pick up, use panel lines and things like that to grab hold of it. Scratch down the panel line. Just if you've got panel lines under your decals, a top tip here, before you take the film off, again run the side of the edge of these tweezers down the panel line and it will just push the decal in. It's not cutting it or damaging it, but it just encourages it to sit all the way into that panel line, like so. If you do that before you take the carrier film off, because obviously once it's gone you run the risk of taking away that printed colour. So that's got most of the Foxy Killer carrier film off, and then the last one I'm going to show you is to use turpentine. You can, I have tested this, you can also use enamel thinner to do this, but do be careful. Again, there's a significant risk of damaging the surface of the model, depending what you've used for your finishes. So a bit of turpentine. This is Old Style MIG Productions odorless turpentine. Bit on the cotton bud, clean cotton bud, and just rub it across the surface. And what you should notice almost straight away is a sort of grabbing sensation, and that's the solvent is just making this carrier film gum up, and it will very, very quickly, I'm barely using any pressure here, start to make that carrier film bobble up and come off. Now if you can't see that it's coming off on the model, you can probably see the bits of gluey looking carrier film that are on the end of this cotton bud now. I found when I tested this that enamel thinner does remove the carrier film even faster, but I did find that it was quite prone to also damaging the colour that's left. So pay your money, take your choice. But on the decals where I couldn't easily lift the carrier film with my tweezers, I used this method. And I did, talking about the Special Hobby 109 here, I did damage a few of the decals a little bit, but I just touched them up with a fine paintbrush afterward. Now, you may ask, with some justification, why bother? Why not just leave them? Because you said yourself, they go down into the detail nicely. They're easy to put on, apart from this slight tendency for the film to curl on itself, but do be careful of that. So why go to the trouble of removing this carrier film if you don't need to? And that's a good question. It's a very fair question, and in many cases a lot of you might think, well, that looks fine, I'm just going to leave it well enough alone, and that is your choice, absolutely. But have a look at this now, and even before I've added any of the finishes, lacquers, weathering, matte coat, what have you, those are now just, they look exactly like painted on markings now. There is no carrier film. Yes, there's a marked, noticeable sort of relief to it, as you'd expect, but that's fine because these are all painted on markings IRL, so some texture is not a bad thing. But that is now purely that printed matter sitting on the surface of this model, with another coat of clear and then the matte coats. It will pretty much disappear completely, and they'll become a homogeneous part of the surface of the model, in a way that a full decal never really can. What I would say though is, obviously use suitable caution when removing the film in any way that you choose. I've showed you the three methods that I know about already. I've mentioned the fourth, that of enamel thinner. Use appropriate care. Go ahead and remove the film, but it's really important that before you do anything else on the model, you put a clear coat back over these, because without that carrier film on there, they now have no protection and they are delicate. You can scratch them very easily. If you start using enamel washes and things like that, you're going to wipe them off basically. So please, once you've removed this carrier film, make sure you put something back over it, whether that's another gloss coat or a matte coat. You must protect them somehow. I will probably go with a very thin coat of X22 to seal them, and then go ahead with the matte coats after that. So there you go, that's how to use Eduard decals. I'll just show you again. Here's what one looks like without the carrier film removed. Bubbly, not terrible, but not great. And here's what they look like with it gone. And to be honest, I think they look brilliant. Probably worth the trouble. And if Eduard wanted to call it a selling point, I think they justifiably could. So there you go. That'll be it for this one. Just a quick one, just about Eduard's silly peelable decals. Until next time then, look after yourselves, look after each other, and Genesis out. P.S. There's always a last word, isn't there? I needed to talk quickly about this shark's mouth at the front here. You saw me fitting this side decal, and this one was already attached, so I have since done obviously the underside one, and it didn't really fit. The two side ones fit beautifully. They line up really well with the gun panel detail. The underneath one didn't really. It had some issues with it didn't meet up at the sides particularly well, and at the back actually there's a bit missing too. And then on top of that, I managed to mangle this aft corner here, as I was sort of, this is, well, doesn't really look it from here, but there's a fair bit of double curvature going on in these two side areas, and as I was manipulating the decal into position, I actually managed to mangle it a little bit here. I think in truth I accidentally got some turpentine on my cotton, but I used the wrong one and I melted it a bit probably. But anyway, I ended up with a big chunk missing there and a big chunk missing here, and the corners didn't meet up, and then the sides didn't meet up either. So I had to do some touch-ups, and I did mention in the earlier in this video that You need to be prepared for that with these decals, because when you take the carrier film off, you quite often damage them ever so slightly. So actually the touch-ups, yeah, not a bad thing to be fair, because I've improved the actual overall look of it quite substantially in doing so. So I had to mix colours. You can get RAF low visibility red and blue in the extra colour range. However, there's no guarantee that they're going to match these decals. So you end up in these situations having to do custom mixes all the time. So for your information, the blue colour I made from Mr. Colour C370. That is RAF World War II Azure Blue, mixed with a lot of white. It's easier to start with white and add blue until you get a colour that resembles what we're working with. The red colour, or the pink, same deal, mostly white with a little Tamiya lacquer paint LP18, which is dull red. And I came to the conclusion of using dull red rather than bright red because proper roundel red isn't a bright traffic light red, and I assumed, probably correctly, that these low vis colours are simply just lightened versions of the original ones. It does seem to have worked that way. Anyway, I mixed those colours and I used a small paintbrush, this actual one, a 40 Creative Models brush, to hand paint in the areas which I broke. I'm going to come up close so that you can spot where I did the touch-ups. I hand painted the areas that were missing and damaged. So another particular area is these notches, for want of a better word, into this panel. They weren't covered by the decal at all. But I also painted around all the teeth, because what I noticed whilst fitting them was that there was a curious sort of halo effect around between the edge of the pink and the blue on all the way around. Something to do with the way it's printed, and it almost had the appearance of being out of register. So I've corrected that by essentially painting the whole thing. It's painted on top of the decal, so I had something to work to, but this is now effectively a hand painted shark's mouth, not a sprayed one. So there you go, a little addendum that I thought worthwhile to add. So if I just grab nose door here, and I'll hold this up nice and close to the camera so that you can see, hopefully you can see what I'm on about. There's such weird kind of almost out of register appearance between the pink and the blue. It's a minor thing, but it is there. And then just to finish that off, I used this was C363 Royal Air Force medium sea grey to do the cheat line around the entire thing. It is clearly grey on pictures of the real thing, and again the decals as they came, it looked a little bit just like weird out of registerness, so I've touched that up as well by hand with a brush. But the rest of it, they've all gone on without any issues. It is now fully decaled. No real problems, and looking rather sweet. I'm not sure if I mentioned too at the start of the video, but I did spend an entire day masking and painting all these small areas of black, silver and grey, which is nice. And there you go. So this is where we're up to now. And now that really is it. And I'll see you on the next one, folks.